I came to Monterey in the 1920s, and the reason was that my two aunts had a thriving millinery business in Salinas, and they decided that they wanted to retire in Pacific Grove. And so they came to Monterey first on Hawthorne Street, just across the street here, and they bought a house. And I remember as a little kid coming down to visit them before I even went to school. But I was born in San Francisco and raised on a ranch in Alamo, California, where we grew pears, and my father worked in San Francisco as a writer for a hotel reporter. Whenever there was a new hotel that went up someplace in western United States, he would be the one that would write it up. And so he only came home weekends, and he came on a train to Alamo. But because my aunts were my mother's sisters, and we had a lot to do with them, and they helped raise my younger sisters and I. I had two twin sisters who were younger. And I came from a family that came to Salinas from the gold rush country. They came from Jackson and Volcano. And the reason they came here was during the gold rush. But when the gold petered out, people had to get a job someplace else. The young men, my great-grandfather did all right in the gold. He was one of the first hydraulic miners, which is really not a good thing, they say today, but that's what he was. And then his son came down to Salinas because the railroad came into Salinas, and that was a place where young men could get a job. And then he sent for my aunts, and his mother and father came down to live in Salinas and are buried in the Garden of Memories in Salinas along with John Steinbeck. But the family lived in Salinas when Steinbeck was born, and I've heard lots of stories about Steinbeck. And because Salinas only had 2,000 people when he was born, and of course everybody knew each other at that time, and especially being in business as these ladies were. Then they moved to New Monterey here on Hawthorne Street. Then later they bought a place in Pacific Grove where they really wanted to live, and that was on 9th and Central, and that house is still there. It was built in 1886. But we would come down to visit them, and even before I went to school, I'd come down and we'd go to the beach in Pacific Grove, where they had a bathhouse, and the bathhouse had two plunges, and these plunges were, one was salt water and the other was ordinary heated water, and they had a high diving pier, and we'd go down, my sister and I, she was older than I, she was about 15 and I was about 5, and we'd watch the divers plunge into this plunge, and it was steamingly hot down there, but it was the place to go in Pacific Grove because we could walk to it, and they had a dance hall, and they had a bowling alley, they sold popcorn, and they had food, and then you could go to the beach, and I just spent a lot of time at that beach down there, and it was fun. I think my sister wanted to go because the soldiers from the Presidio would come down there a lot, and she'd get down there and talk to them, and that was fun. Then later, after going back to Alamo and the ranch, my mother got ill, and she couldn't take care of us children. She had a bad case of asthma, so we came down to live with the aunts in Pacific Grove, and the one aunt worked in a bakery on Hoffman Street, and it was owned by the John Flaws family, and it was on Hoffman and just above Fulham Street. And they had a little girl my age. I was about 7 and in the 2nd grade. And I would come down when my aunt worked at the bakery, especially on Saturdays, and play with Mary Flaws. And we were allowed to go play it down on Fulham Street, but we could never go on Wave or on Ocean View, which is now Cannery Row, because it was considered an unseemly place for little girls to be on their own. It was kind of a rough element down there with all the workers of the cannery. But one of my aunts, after they retired, bought some houses here in Monterey and Pacific Grove and rented them. And among them were the little houses that the cannery workers worked in. And she had about 10 or 12 little houses that were just one room. And we would come down once a month to get the rent, and it cost $5 for each cabin a month, and that was part of her income after they retired from Salinas. And I would come down with her from the bakery, and we would collect the rent. And the houses just had one little cot in it, an iron stove, wood stove, and a table and a couple of chairs, running water, and a closet. And for that, they paid $5 a month. And as I say, we would come down there, and I guess the Monterey History Society decided that these were historical houses, and they would save some of them. So they put 3 of them down on Cannery Row now. They had been on Wave Street, my aunts were. And so they're still there, that you can see them. They're fixed up like a museum. You look in and you see they're just the way that they were, just a simple little cabin with just this small amount of furniture, but that's where the cannery workers and some of the fishermen lived. And the reason we collected the rent was because some of them, didn't read or write or speak English, and so that was our job. But then later, I came to stay in Pacific Grove and went to grammar school, and then I'd go back to Alamo, and I came back, and my mother came too, and she bought a house on 18th Street, and we didn't live with my aunt anymore for a while, but she did keep the twins. The aunts were wonderful people and really helped us out in our family. And then I went to high school and graduated from Pacific Grove High School. And then after high school, I didn't know exactly what to do. I got some jobs in Monterey. I worked at the dollar store for 35 cents an hour. I worked at Penny's for 35 cents an hour. And then I got a job. This was during, just as the Depression was starting in the early 30s, and 29 and 30. And so any job you could get was a good job. And then they started with when President Roosevelt came in, he started the National Youth Authority, and I worked for them. And I worked in a nursery school way up here on the hill in, the edge of New Monterey and Pacific Grove. There was a nursery school put on by this National Youth Authority. And I worked there for about a year and saved money in order to go to college. And I found out that I had quite a love for working with little children, and I decided to be a teacher. And then I went on to San Francisco State. But the woman that was the head of the nursery was named Julia Brennig, and she gave me a ride to her home once, and she lived in the
Gallatin.
well, it was Gallatin's at that time. Now it's the Stokes building. She, I think, was a Gallatin. And she lived in this Gallatin house. And Gallatin's had a very good restaurant there, a very upscale restaurant that we would go to a few times. And now I think it's Stokes, a restaurant, and I believe it's still a restaurant. And so anyway, that's the reason I went to Pacific Grove. But then, you know, I went to church, and Joe went to church too, and we met one evening, and he asked to walk home with me. And so we started from there, and he said, well, how about a date next weekend? So we did that, and that's how it all got started. And then at that time, Joe was working in Cannery. He was hired down there. He'll tell you about that. And he would come to see me to make a date, and he'll tell you why I didn't let him in. We'd stand on the porch instead of inviting him in.
When I was working in the cannery, of course, you pick up the smell, your clothes or your skin or your hair. And so when I'd come to visit her, she'd make me stand out on the porch downwind. And we got to know each other pretty well. And but then later I went on into the service, and we decided if we were going to have any time together, we better get married. So we did right after the war started. And we've been, we say we're related by marriage for the last 70 years.